I'm Andy Erwin, and this is the Storytellers. Coming up on this edition of the Storytellers, we have every once in a while, I just feel like we have a master storyteller come through. And it's, somebody that as a filmmaker, I feel like for the next hour, I'm in for a treat, that I get to sit there and kind of take in the story myself and just absorb wisdom and knowledge as a filmmaker. And so today's guest is one of those people. He's an Oscar-nominated filmmaker, producer, director, writer, has done iconic films, and was brought to us through a specific project, and that we're getting a chance to collaborate with him. And we're just, amazed at Kingdom that we get to be a part of something like this. So this guy has done films like Finding Neverland, Stranger Than Fiction. He's done, a James Bond film with Quantum of Solace. He most recently did A Man Called Otto, and has done just some beautiful films. Christopher Robin, so many, the list goes on and on and on. And he doesn't make bad films. And we are working with him currently on a film called Whitebird, starring Helen Mirren, that we're going to talk about on the show today. But today, would you please welcome my guest? And I'm really excited. I'll just get coffee for this guy, Marc Forster. Today we've got one of my favorites, Marc Forster. Welcome to the Storytellers, man.
Thanks for having me, Andy. Feeling very honored to be on your podcast and chatting with you.
Yeah, man. Your body of work has some of my favorites. I mean, I think movies like Finding Neverland and Stranger Than Fiction, I think, are perfect films. A Man Called Otto. It's just been amazing to see, your career and how it's kind of evolved over the years. That you kind of you can't be really put in a box of just one thing. You always try to experiment and do things that are new and stories that I personally love. The way we kind of got connected was through Lionsgate, and they brought us your beautiful film Whitebird, and I got a chance to see it, and I just was like, man, anything that we can do with this guy would be amazing. So we went to go sit down with you and have a breakfast or a coffee. And, I didn't know what I was going to get, because I was like, this guy has done amazingly big films. But the thing is there's, instead of certain storytellers are ego people and certain people are passion about story, and you're the latter. And when we sat down at the table, rather than there being a heightening of ego, there was actually this mutual respect of you wanting to understand the audience that we serve and us wanting to understand your story. And for me, there was just that instant connection. Talk to me a little bit about that, about the people you like to collaborate with and what kind of draws you into those kind of relationships.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. But thank you first, Andy, for, jumping on board and helping, bringing Whitebird to the world and sharing it with the audiences across the world. I mean, I'm very thankful for that, because I think it's a movie about kindness, and
Yep.
And I think it's kindness is one of the most, something very dear to my heart, and one of the most important themes, I think, in this day and age. And I'm just really grateful that you guys jumped on board. And moving into that, you talk about ego. When I watch artists in general, if it's filmmakers or
Yep.
or any kind of artists, writers, painters, you always see the beginning of their career, which usually are full of passion and love for their craft, and they sort of create some of their best work because it really truly comes from their heart. And then they achieve a certain amount of success, and once the success comes in, often your ego grows, and people tell you, because at the beginning, often it's the case is that nobody believes in you. It's really just yourself, maybe your family, but not a lot of people believe. And some of them say, "Oh, you're dreaming. You can't make that come true." And then ultimately, you have so much passion, love for your vision that it becomes true. And often, a lot of artists become successful. And once the success hits in, and they find a fan base, that it often happens that your ego grows. And I realized when I look at artists I loved, or filmmakers I loved, that usually their work at the beginning was very strong, and then sort of it plateaued, and they either started repeating themselves, or it wasn't as connected to themselves anymore as the early work.
Yeah.
And I realized that has a lot to do that if you keep on breaking your ego down and keep on sort of trying to start like ultimately, like I think like a child who sees the world for the first time, because every time as a child you discover the world because you're new in this world and you always see it with fresh eyes. You
Yep.
can like sort of every time you sort of reinvent yourself. And that's one of the reasons I switch out to a lot of different genres is
Yeah.
because I always think if there's not a possibility to fail, then I
Huh.
don't want to do the project. I don't want to
Wow.
ever want to feel too safe because you want to always test yourself and say there might be the possibility of failure because ultimately, I think failing in life is as important as actually being successful and achieving things.
That philosophy, and I love that because I mean, I think anxiety and those fears that come with the possibility of failure just means you care, and you're not mailing it in. And I love that about and other filmmakers that I really enjoy have that same mentality, like Danny Boyle and people like that have that kind of same mentality, and that's why they do similar to what you're doing. Was there a moment in time that you when you broke onto the scene, you kind of went straight to the top with Monsters Ball, and that was your second film, and all of a sudden it's Oscar nominated and all this acclaim that comes with it. Was there this moment for you of validation where you saw the ego creeping in, or did you kind of preemptively kind of plan for that and say, I want to stay connected to my stories?
It's interesting. I grew up in Switzerland and in the mountains in a place called Davos. And my dad was very successful when I grew up. And when I was about 17 years old, he lost all his money. And when that happened, I thought, at first, when people at school look at you strangely, said, oh, they went broke, or they sort of don't. You're somehow a little bit of an outcast suddenly when that happened. And I was thinking, oh, like we have no that our fortune is gone, money is gone. What are we gonna do? And I thought, oh, I would get depressed and sad, and I was waiting for it, and somehow I didn't. I actually got really like I felt happier, and I said, why is
Wow.
that? And I realized that my parents suddenly gave me more love and attention. And I
Wow.
realized the family came together for the first time, and it was truly about love and nothing to do with material things anymore. And
Huh.
and we were three boys, and my dad, my mom, and that we all just really connected and were there for each other. And I realized, that's really interesting. I don't want to ever make decisions based on after that incident happened, based on what's best monetarily for me. I always will follow my heart, and
Wow.
ultimately the money will follow me. And because if the
Huh.
heart is not aligned with me, then nothing will be. So that's sort of what I learned very early on. So I realized at the same time that everything can change overnight and everything can be gone overnight. So there is no security. I mean, we believe there's security, and we have these things that these construct that we say, oh, we have property or have this or that, but everything, there could be a storm or fire, and it's just gone. You just don't know. And and so I just always believe that ultimately, unless the heart is aligned, nothing else will be. So then, when I came to Hollywood and started, it was at the beginning. I went to NYU Film School and moved to Hollywood, and I realized they taught me how to make movies, but ultimately, it's called movie business. The business
Yeah.
part is still part of it,
Yep.
and you still have to learn the business part. And you can say, and I had went to school with some incredible visual artists and filmmakers, but ultimately later on they didn't make it uh, as filmmakers because they never sort of always rejected the business part, and you have to embrace it. And on one hand, you're a filmmaker, artist, storyteller. On the other hand, there's a business side because you have to deal with budgets. You have to deal
Yep.
with selling your movie. You have to there are all these aspects that if you want to be a pure artist, you probably will not love, but you
Yeah.
have to embrace
Yep.
and you have to learn. It's just
Yep.
part of it. And you're dealing with lots of people and lots of responsibility. And you have to make sure that your investors with films who believe in you and give you a certain amount of money, that you make them secure. Look, you
Yep.
respect their trust that they give you, and ultimately that they feel they're going to get their money back.
Yep.
And I mean, you did very well with that. You're a master.
Yeah. I bet I mean, there is something very equalizing to being an independent filmmaker and, having had to also raise the money for the film and look these people in the eye and then sit there and watch opening weekend and kind of, want to, throw up because you're like, how do I, it just really takes a lot of the pretentiousness out of the job where you're like, I'm here to communicate and connect with an audience, and it's a risky investment, but I have to do my due diligence to make sure that gives it every opportunity to try to win. And it definitely brings a practical element into it for sure. I agree. Totally agree.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, then coming to Hollywood is, and it wasn't an easy road. And once you get success, I really, one is very appreciative to the people who show up and watches, watch your movie and connect with your story. And ultimately, with films, I want to, intend to entertain, but also want to inspire and want to, move people.
Yeah. Well, with that, I mean, I think that, there is something there's a common DNA and a thread to any film that has Marc Forster's name on it, where it may switch genres. I mean, it might go from a zombie apocalypse movie like World War Z or a James Bond film, or go to something very intimate like Finding Neverland or A Man Called Otto. But there's this kind of, desire for redemption of the human spirit and this idea of hope that kind of comes across, regardless of what genre you touch. And, the idea of these protagonists that are searching for happiness and meaning through the experiences of other people, and they're trying to find that. There's something very beautiful about how your films weave in that humanity. Where was the moment that you first found your voice, where it's like, you come from NYU, you start doing films, and I know a lot of times as a young filmmaker, you try on different hats, and then you find one that was like, this is what I want to say. What was that moment for you?
Um, I would say like sort of in the late 90s, when sort of the dogma filmmaking style came across. And who isn't familiar with dogma was sort of a movement out of Denmark, Scandinavia, which Lars von Trier was sort of spearheading, which was a lot of these group of filmmakers coming together using VHS and video,
Yeah.
and making these very low budget movies.
Yeah.
And that technique, and I remember I saw this film Festen, and when I saw that film Festen called Celebration by Thomas Winterberg, I saw the film, and I was just like so impressed that he was able to make this movie with a VHS camera, and I got just super inspired, and I left the cinema, and I went to have dinner that night with friends, and the wife of my friend told us a story, and that story sort of inspired me, and I wrote a film with them, then my friends, called Everything Put Together. And that's sort of a film we made for $50,000 on a video camera, and then went to Sundance with it. And I won the Movado to Watch Award and a couple of other awards with it. And that sort of opened the door. And making that movie was very sort of, was very liberating. And it was trying it was a very grounded film, but also sort of a psychological film. And it deals with a woman who's married and with her husband, and they're having their first baby, and they lose their baby through sudden infant death syndrome. And it's really dealing with her with the aftermath psychologically. Wow. How friends sort of almost instead of coming together and being kind and helping her, they almost sort of distance themselves from her because they feel like almost she's like slightly diseased, that her
Right.
her little baby passed. So it was dealing with that, and it was deeply psychological, and somehow I love human beings, and I'm always inspired how, I believe human beings are capable of so many positive and good things, and we are capable of helping each other, inspiring each other. And I always felt as a storyteller, that's what my calling is. That's what I wanted to do, to move people and inspire them. Because I think at the end, I think we're here such a short time,
Yeah.
and if the more uh, positivity we can bring into other people's lives, the better.
And I think, for me, when I was really arrested by your body of work, it was Finding Neverland, and I remember watching that and experiencing all those things. There was just something so pure and so innocent about it. And out of Johnny Depp's body of work, it's my favorite thing that he's done. There was just something really, contained and understated about his performance. It was brilliant. And when he got to the end of the movie, that moment between Johnny Depp and Freddie Highmore sitting on the bench and him trying to wrestle with finding meaning and losing his mother, like that scene, and that little kid, that has gone on to be a really good actor. It was one of my favorite moments I had seen in cinema in a long time. Tell me a little bit about the experience of making that film and why that one really arrested you and you had to tell it.
I think, obviously for people who haven't seen the movie, it's about how J.M. Barrie got inspired to write Peter Pan. And when I grew up in Switzerland in the mountains, my parents didn't had television, so I
Yeah.
grew up without TV. And instead of being entertained, I always had to entertain myself. So because of that, when I was like 10, 12 years old, I had all these outfits my mom got me. It's like from like cowboy outfits to other outfits. I could dress up and play these games in the woods behind our house. So I always dressed up in these different sort of theatrical outfits and entertain myself, and had sort of these imaginary friends, so to speak, and set up
Huh.
scenarios. And then once I started watching movies, so that was like was 10, 11, 12, was like going to the sort of cinema. There were two cinemas in the village. And so I was 13, 14, I was allowed to go to the cinema. And when I started to go to the cinema, I remember as one of the first films I saw was E.T.
Mm.
And I was sitting there watching E.T. and I just was crying
Yeah.
and crying. And I was thinking to myself, I was so touched by this, and I said, "That's what I want to do. That's what that's like.
Huh.
You can tell stories, you can move people." And I saw the whole cinema; it was a packed cinema. Everybody was crying, and I was thinking to myself, "That's what I want to do." And I
Huh.
didn't realize until much later that it's a gift if you know what you want to do in life. Because I had many
Mm.
friends that never figure out what their passion is or what they would love to do in life. They somehow never find that. And I thought that there's something really beautiful about knowing what you want to do in life. And so I just followed that path. And and then and then with Finding Neverland, when I read that script, it reminded me of like when he has this inspiration with the kids on a
Yeah.
pirate ship or in a western town, how he gets inspired by it, how of my childhood when I was a pirate and a cowboy, and I
Huh.
thought this is sort of my childhood. I need to make this, and it was a funny little anecdote at the end of the movie. There's they're in the house, and Kate Winslet's character opens the door and walks into
Hmm.
Neverland. And I felt like at that point, the barrier between realism and fantasy sort of bridges.
Yes. It's
And
brilliant.
and so I said we should lift the entire wall up instead of her going, because the script was written, she walks through the house. I said, let's
Yeah.
the door, let's have lift up wall of the house. And then the producer says, yeah, but budgeted out and said, look, this costs, like, if you build a wall like that and that wall goes up, it's $50,000. We don't have that. I said, no, we need to build that wall. And somehow we scraped together money. And that's another thing. Ultimately, if you have a vision for something in a movie and you feel like it's really important,
Yep.
that you really try to figure it out and say, okay, let's maybe compromise here or compromise there, but let's
Yep.
scrape together the 50 grand for that important moment, because it's like cinematic and lifts you into Neverland.
Yep.
And then, the moment at the end, at the bench, there was another moment where I felt what would be beautiful if we sort of track back and you see Johnny Depp and Freddie Highmore sitting on the bench and suddenly
Yep.
they disappear. And at that time, because it's early 2000s, we used the motion control rig, which
Yeah.
is sort of that it's totally, for people who are not aware of what it is, it's basically that you're completely stable and you can dissolve them from the bench without with them just disappearing within the same shot. And you shoot it once with them and then once without them. And sort of we were shooting it that day and we started setting up this motion control rig, and it started raining. And suddenly that whole rig started stuttering. It didn't work. And I already was nervous. I said, oh my, now I'm not going to get my shot.
Right.
And then ultimately the producer came back, look, we can shoot another day. So I went into the trailer to tell Johnny Depp, look, unfortunately we have to come back another day. And the actors were already acting their hearts out.
Yep.
He said, no, that's fine with me. And then I went to Freddie Highmore's trailer, and Freddie looked at me and said, oh, I'm so glad, Mark, because today I wasn't completely on. And
Wow.
and he was already
Freddie's what? But at the moment, like Freddie's what, like
10,
9 or
11.
10 there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
11.
It's like that's a mature. I mean, that's such a. I mean, like little man, 10 years old, be like, thanks, Mark. I need to.
Yes. And then the next time we came back, that was this magical shot on the side of him where literally he teared up, and you could see the sort of the tears forming in his eyes, and then just the one tear dropped.
Yep.
And there was that magical moment when he drops this one tear. I said, how does he do that? I just was still, you can't direct it. That's sort of the magic of the moment, because it didn't have to happen the first time. It was the second time we were there.
Yeah, man. That was magic, and like, the restraint in that moment, especially, it wasn't a cry fest. It was the welling up of the tears, and that one tear just sold the moment. And I remember it just being in awe of that moment, just the stillness and the simplicity, of the two of them together. I think, with you work with, you don't work with a lot of, the same way you don't really work in the same genre over and over again. You also, have a lot of variety in the actors that you cast. Like, other than Ewan McGregor, I don't know that there's many that you've worked with more than once. Like, what's the actor that you work with that has pushed you the most as a director? Like, has there been one that really you either learn things from, or they just really pushed you out of your comfort zone?
I love actors, and I love working with actors, and I've been fortunate to work with many different ones, and so many great ones, and they're all different. So it's hard to say who is your favorite. The interest, because they're also talented. But I must say, The Man Called Otto, working with Tom Hanks, was incredible, special, because Tom and I have a very similar sensitivity, and so working with an actor where you basically could, like, I had a thought, and he had the same thought, and I could tell him what I felt about a scene, and he felt exactly the same thing about the scene, and was able to give me and what I was looking for, because he had the same notion. Because ultimately, then you're working on instincts, and you have obviously you need a great script, but once you have a great script, you're working on there's a lot of instincts, and what you feel is how your interpretation and your vision of a scene and how that should play out. And we were always in sync, and that collaboration was really something very special, because it's very seldom that you feel you're working with someone where you're feeling the same thing. And it's often work with actors that, look, this is how I see it, and you work with great actors, and they were trying to please you and make you happy. And I didn't really had an issue where an actor was trying, or often, I also like to play around, that when an actor says, look, I have a notion, we should try it this way, then we try it. But if it doesn't ring true to me, I have to voice that.
Yeah.
because ultimately you're a mirror, and you putting them as a director, and you know that you're putting the movie together in your head,
Yep.
and you know exactly how you would like the story to progress, and how you want the character to change from scene to scene, or not change. And but all these little steps, these little building blocks you're putting together as you're building this
Yeah.
vision, or this house you're
Hmm.
making,
It's ingredients for the
is
dish. Hmm.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I found that for the ones that I really enjoy the most are like you're talking about with Tom, who's definitely on a bucket list for me. I would love to have collaborated with him, and the fact that what you guys, built out of that, of such a heavy backdrop with this idea of suicide, but to bring the charm and the whimsy and the humor to that story of this redemption of this kind of man's soul and causing him to live again was beautiful. And I think that, for me, I love working with actors that they don't have anything that they have to prove ego wise, but they have such a depth and a resource of amazing skill. And when you work with somebody like a Tom, for me, it was working with like his counterpart from Forrest Gump, Gary Sinise. Like Sinise had been a longtime friend, and being able to sit down with him and collaborate, and especially with somebody that sat in the director's chair before and directed Of Mice and Men when he was 32, and so he could very easily do my job. But it wasn't a competition. It was like you said, it was like an agreement of how do you see the story? This is how I see it, and in building off of each other's ideas. It was almost like just having a co-collaborator. It was, there's something there's such a wealth of knowledge that they bring to a set like that. So definitely a tinge of jealousy on my part that it was Tom for you. With the other question I had, and then I want to get into Whitebird, because it's something I'm really passionate about. This story is one I can't wait for audiences to see, but we're going to get to that in a second. The other question I had for you, just selfishly, is you've gone from really intimate character dramas to sometimes some really big, studio films like World War Z, or James Bond, the 22nd James Bond film with Quantum of Solace. What is that transition like for you as a filmmaker to go from something intimate to something bigger scale? How do you make that transition? Because that's something I've always kind of wrestled with.
You know, it's until Quantum of Solace, I only made smaller independent movies,
Right.
and there's some an intimacy you have, and as you just said, and it's like almost you're having like a small boutique hotel with a few guests you cater for, and you're making sure like 8-10 rooms, and you make sure those people are taken care of and are happy, and everybody's well fed, and they sleep well, and you have
Yeah.
and it's all run smoothly,
Right.
and you're walking away with a lovely experience. And then suddenly moving to Quantum of Solace, it feels like suddenly you become running a big Ritz Carlton or Hilton,
Yeah.
and with like 800 beds, and and it becomes very big, very big, very quickly, and you don't know not everybody by their first name.
Uh-huh.
You don't know the kitchen staff,
Uh-huh.
and the reception staff, and all the guests and everything, and it's very, very quickly you realize you can't basically control it all. You start have to communicate, and much more sort of start letting go of certain things.
Wow.
And you
Wow.
suddenly have a second unit, and that was the first time me working with a second unit, which I don't something not shooting myself. And then if you're like have a strong vision, and you have a certain aspect as a director, certain control issues, because you're a control freak,
Right.
but you want to make sure it is done the way you want to do it. It's tricky to you basically you tell people what you want, and then you see what comes back. And to communicate, you realize communicating details, communicating your vision becomes much more important than actually if you're doing these smaller movies, you're talking to the director and your DP and production designer. It's much more intimate. But then directing this larger vision is definitely much more stressful, and takes, for me personally, it took a lot out of me, and it was very exhausting at the end. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd say at the end of the journey, yeah, I felt like I ran a marathon.
Hmm.
And you working because the other thing is on like Quantum of Solace, we had, I mean, there were a couple of aspects. We were facing a writer's strike,
Yeah.
and we hadn't a finished script. And then on the other side, there's a release date, and then we only had 5 or 6 weeks to cut the movie in
Ma-
editorial,
Oh
and
my gosh.
go straight into the sound mix, and then straight into the release.
Six
So
weeks.
yeah,
That's insane. For
no,
anybody listening that doesn't understand, like that's a monumental task. That's like, a half or third of the normal amount of time that a film that size you'd think. But man, holy cow.
yes, and you basically work 7 days a week. You shoot during the week 5 days, and then you cut 2 weeks on the weekend, and you shoot, and then you don't have a completed script on hand as well. So everything gets. I mean, that definitely you wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, I forgot that. So all you do is literally breathe and think and live that film, and it just has an emotional and physical toll on you at the end of it, that you feel like you just need to sleep.
Oh man, I've got post traumatic stress just hearing that. That's insane. I think I'm built a lot more like you too, because I would be much more comfortable delving into the character piece than the big spectacle. But you've done both well. That kind of brings us to Whitebird. I this film is a big film. It's a big, beautiful film. That's a set piece for Helen Mirren and this backstory of this character that she plays. But it's really intimate. It's the most emotionally engaging film I've seen in a long time. And when I saw it, and Lionsgate showed it to us at Kingdom, I just said, anything that we can do for this film. And the last time I had that experience with something they brought to us was the movie that this spins off from, which was Wonder. And so when we saw Wonder, we were in the midst of finishing I Can Only Imagine, and they let us see an early cut. And I watched it at home on my computer. And the idea of the power of kindness, it just arrested me. And I just was like, whatever we can do to support this. So we kind of got behind it and just unofficially got the word out and then that took off and was a phenomenon. But I thought the story was finished there. And this story, Whitebird, is rooted in a spinoff from that, but in a very unlikely, unorthodox way that allows the same thing that you did with Finding Neverland, of it just pulls that wall up and allows you to enter into this bigger, fantastical experience set in something really grounded during World War II. Walk people through what this story is and what made you sign on to do Whitebird. Why this story?
Like you, I loved Wonder, and I think R.J. Palacio, the author who wrote the book to Wonder, wrote this graphic novel, sort of the follow up, and she took the bully from Wonder and
Julian.
made him a character in this story, and sort of that it became a story of redemption.
Yeah.
And I took the same actor, Bryce, and casted who played the bully in Wonder, and casted him in this movie. So now he's a few years older, and and Helen Mirren plays the grandmother, and sort of the sort of tells the story of her childhood. And when grandmother, and the first time I read the script, what really hit me is like, they're having, he comes home from school and his parents are out, and his granny is home alone and made dinner for them, and
Yep.
so they sit down for dinner and talk, and she asks him what he's up to, and obviously in the end of Wonder, he's being expelled from school, and
Yep. For
now
bullying.
he's in a new school, and he explains to her that he just wants to fit in, he just wants to be normal, and doesn't want to stand out, and Helen Mirren's character looks at him a little sort of questions that, and he says, "What's wrong with that?" And she says, "Nothing is wrong with that, but have I ever told you my story?" And then she tells her childhood story, which is just the most intimate and moving story, but at the same time, it gives you room to sort of this magical realism. And it was interesting when I read it it was sort of like we were probably like 6 to 8 weeks into COVID, and a lot of the story plays in a barn. So
Yeah.
at this point, haven't left my house for like probably 6 to 8 weeks,
Yeah.
and I'm reading this story, and suddenly I feel the barn
Wow.
where the our protagonist, the girl, is hiding, and I suddenly feel the claustrophobia in that barn, and then feel the emotional intensity of it all, and felt like at the same time there was this beautiful story of giving this bully this sort of second chance,
Yeah.
chance also of transformation of who he was and who he can be, and ultimately the power of kindness, and often I think we are, like all of us, I think in life, we're here to wake up, and
Yeah.
here to, we come to in this world, and we're all a little bit asleep and trying to find our way, and we're here trying to be more conscious, and we're all, in our path trying to be better, and it's a path, there's and hope, and that's what I loved about this story, that is about redemption, and I'm very always attracted to these redemptive stories.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that. You know, Helen Mirren has a line in the film that goes something like that: the fact of when an act of kindness could cost you your life, it becomes something of a miracle. And when I heard that line, it just took my breath away. Like it literally brought big tears to my eyes. And and I think for us at Kingdom, we can't get behind something that doesn't, we can't invite the audience to go on a journey that hasn't impacted us first, that we haven't had an emotional experience that we want to share. And when I watched the film for the first time, it just so arrested me that it just had this sticky residue that I thought about it for weeks. And that idea about the power of kindness. Ultimately, the story is about, it takes place at Helen Mirren retracing the family history to her time as a little girl during the Holocaust and World War II, and as a little Jewish girl, and the persecution that her family went through, and these people of faith that stood up for her. There's a priest and some nuns, and then this family that all stand up for her at high cost, personal cost, the cost of their safety, and ultimately laying their lives down in certain ways for this little girl. And it was something that really clicked as something so relevant. Why do you think this story is relevant now, and why do you feel like it has something to say to the world in general?
I think we living in a time where, and actually, we made when we made this movie, I just felt like that the more, it's interesting, the more people there are on the planet,
Hmm.
the more tension and friction there is, because
Yeah.
there's that's I think it's just a given, and I think the more healing and kindness needs to happen, because ultimately I think the danger is, if the more people there are, the less resources there are, the more tension is created, and the more respectful we have to be with one another, and the more, and I think if we, ultimately can heal ourselves, and be kind to our neighbor, and can be kind to others, I think we can live in a more positive, healing world. I feel like there's and a feeling that we're living in a time that was like, ultimately we have, multiple wars going on in the world, and I think that this particular film, who's also set during wartime, that it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what war, we can put that in any kind of war around the world, and the story would work. And I feel that, and it inspired me, because I feel that ultimately having the courage to be kind is something that takes a lot out of you, as you said, like putting your own life on the line for
Yeah.
save someone else. But I just always feel, I believe in humanity, that we will all uh, fi- find find the light. I just believe in that, and
Yeah.
that we all ultimately can be saved, and that's sort of the what my belief is, and that's why I think it's important to tell stories like that.
I think there's also something about, especially in the world today, it's so easy to point the finger at somebody as other and somebody that's different than you. And I think the thing I do love about your films that I think really plays to our audience that we have serviced of faith is the idea of trying to empathize and understand people that are different than yourself. And, there's something that happened for me, and I don't know if it happened for you on this one, but we did a movie called Woodlawn. And so I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. And so Alabama is my roots. And the story takes place in Alabama. And Alabama has a very racially charged past with racism, especially during the civil rights movement. And I think it was a cauldron of that before that was tapped into during a lot of things that happened in Birmingham. And so our film took place at the end of segregation, when it was just kind of at its pinnacle of that boiling over of racial tension and racism. And for me, growing up in Alabama, there's a part of me that there's roots traced there that I had to kind of empathize with people's experience that was different than mine. And it really telling that story when my family roots were connected to that community really did so much to develop this deep empathy. And so for you doing a movie like Whitebird, there's something that I was really fascinated about is, I know that your roots are Swiss. You grew up in Switzerland, but your family's roots are German. And doing a story during World War II and dealing with this story and the impact on this little girl, what was your perspective going into that? And how did that, how did your, perspective on that impact you and telling that story from this point of view?
It's interesting. My mom is German, and I was born in Germany and then grew up in Switzerland. And my mother, she was born in 1939, so she was like sort of 5 years old when the Second World War ended. But even then, she always told me, like, ultimately, uh, how even at a young age, sort of the war affected her, and ultimately, when they sort of all had to run into the basement or into the to hide when the sirens went off. And what's interesting about it is, like, she, even though she was just 5 years old when the war ended, she carried that with her, and ultimately rebuilding, sort of, because she was Germany, her parents rebuilding their business and their work. That even my grandmother, I remember when she was literally uh, before she died, she was like in her late 80s, and I visited her. That she was still to that moment always saving all the food, like saving. And at that point, her husband has passed, my grandfather, but they they became very successful merchants and lived a good life. But she still felt like, anytime everything has to, like, she has to save money, she has to be very, like, ultimately what they rebuilt, that she was very conservative with everything, how everything was sort of spent and also consumed. And it's interesting, I think, a post-war generation of a war, how you really understand that when everything is destroyed, how to rebuild it, that it really affects and scars you emotionally very
Yeah.
deeply. And I think we lived in a time now, our generation, you and myself, which has been, we have been enjoying economic growth for so long,
Right.
and that I really hope, that that we can stay on a peaceful full
Yeah.
route going forward, because it's I think it's especially I think for children, more than anyone, it's it's just interesting how it affected my mom and also grandma, how they told me stories, and they they were like just they weren't involved much in the war themselves, sort of just
Mm.
on the outskirts, but still how it affected them emotionally and mentally as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you brought such an empathy, I think, for this little girl and the story, and you really, I think, were the perfect advocate for the experience of these people in their what they went through in World War II, and this little Jewish girl in particular. Um, what impacted you about telling her story? Giving that backdrop, like what was it that you took away, empathizing? Because for me on Woodlawn, it was just like, there was a part of me that, I'm a white person from the South and I grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and telling this story of this African American community, all of a sudden there came a moment. It was like, I want to make sure I get this right, and so I listened to my cast a lot, and I really delved into their experience and trying to understand and empathize, and it really impacted me in a huge way. Telling this story, like, what impacted you?
Um, Sorry, I'm just like realized my laptop is running out. I just plug it in.
It's all
Um,
good.
um, my mom, we were raised Catholic,
Yeah.
and then sort of when we were raised Catholic, my mother always felt like because of the war what she lived through, said, look, it's very important to us, to my parents, that uh, you know that you also study other religions and understand them and understand their history and background for educational purposes. And she always very early on wanted us to study Judaism and also and also from Buddhism and Muslims and so on. She just thought it was important to study it all, just to have a knowledge, so you
Right.
understand where you come from, and then you understand where other people come from. And she, because also the part of that was, I think, because of what they lived through, and sort of, I thought she was important to understand other cultures, and in all of my movies, I always dive into, a lot of times into other cultures, you
Yeah.
know, and in that, what I love is connecting to humanity and the heart, and understand them. And in regard to Whitebird, is I felt, if ultimately to connect to Sarah, who is the protagonist, and
Hmm.
was really to begin with, and as she says, a little bit of a spoiled and
Yeah.
blinded sort of girl, and then ultimately wakes up and becomes, ultimate, like less selfish and more
Hmm.
of a conscious person herself, and that sort of transition, I feel like that awakening, I just really inspired me. And I think it doesn't matter if she would have been, whatever sort of religious background she would have had,
Right.
she was in that moment, she was on a run to protect her own life,
Mm.
and the person they bullied or they sort of excluded, uh, ultimately was the boy who protected her and risked his own life to protect
I
her
love it.
life. And I thought that sort of dynamic, no matter what the background is or the people are, I just saw this is transformational, and that's sort of what inspired me, and I thought is worth telling. Um, it's so from that point of view, I felt like that's why I mentioned that you can replace this story into any kind of any
Yeah.
kind of war. It doesn't have to be the Second World War. It could be the
Yeah.
Ukrainian one at the moment, or
Right.
anything else.
Yeah. There was something, I think, that's something we do try to do with our films too, is to find a story that impacts us on a personal level, that does showcase the things that we believe in a beautiful way, but then find something that has that universal overlay that is applicable regardless, of the backdrop. And there is something very universally relatable about the story, I think. And for me, from a place of faith, and for what our audience that we have invested in is we do want to do we have done stories that that do have that backdrop of faith. And I think for us, the entry point for the audience and the things we get involved in, sometimes that's implicitly faith, and that is a movie like Jesus Revolution. But then there's other films that we love to invest in that it's faith in action, and it just shows the core tenets of what we believe in. Like you said, the power of redemption and self-sacrifice. And I think this movie is about that self-sacrifice. It's kindness to its highest level, and from our standpoint of what we believe, comes down to that idea that greater love has no man than he would lay down his life for his friends. And in this case, that's what the tenet of this film is about. And in ways that you set the stakes in ways we care about the characters so much that it sticks the landing, man. And so it's one that I'm proud to share with the Kingdom audience, because it does that in a powerful, powerful way, and really earns the right to be heard and showcases what we believe in a lived out kind of way. What's your viewpoint on, like, I mean, I know you've interacted with the faith audience some because you did Machine Gun Preacher. You've kind of delved into this at points. What's your viewpoint on, like, how you've seen kind of the faith audience kind of grow and the stories becoming more and more nuanced to be able to kind of interact with the tenets of the idea of faith?
I think, to be honest, the faith audience is very much, because as I said, I love these human stories. I think ultimately the sensitivities of faith audience are very much aligned with sort of my storytelling and
Yeah.
and the kind of storytelling I love and like to watch. And to be honest, I'm very thankful, as I mentioned at the beginning, that you guys were inspired and came on board and are supporting the movie, because a film like this, especially where you have two young people in the leads, two teenagers who are the leads in the movie, and apart from Helen Mirren and Gillian Anderson, there's no big movie star to promote the film.
Sure.
I think it's more important than ever that audiences are supporting movies like this, because
Yeah.
only if audiences supporting movies like this and movies like this can get made.
Right.
Because if those movies don't work or do not have a certain box office success, everybody just wants to make these big tentpole movies. And I
Right.
think these are not just the only movies that deserve to be made, and especially for younger people. And I think this movie is very. It's like almost a 4-quadrant film. You can watch it
Yep.
with your kids, with your family, and with your grandparents. And I think that's kind of the movies I love. I love these family films.
Yep. I think it's a movie that it's fighting for movies that have a soul,
Yeah.
and I think the other thing, just to let the audience know, with the 4-quadrant idea, something that you tapped into really beautifully with this one, is it really kind of utilizes the idea of whimsical, and it creates this a world that sparks the imagination, not dissimilar to things that you've done with Christopher Robin in Finding Neverland. There's this beautiful backdrop that this barn becomes, that it becomes a stage for the imagination. And there's a beautiful, innocent kind of love story element to it that whimsically taps into something unexpected and takes you in ways that, at points are fairy tale like, but is a very grounded kind of backdrop. And so it's a story that, we're proud to share with the audience. It comes out in theaters October 4th, and it's going to be out everywhere. Lionsgate's releasing it. We're a part of that. So I can't recommend highly enough that Whitebird is something that we're passionate about being worthy of your ticket. And so be on the lookout for that. That comes out really soon. And man, it's a privilege to be a part of that journey with you, Marc. It's one that we're excited about. As we wrap up, just a couple of fun last questions. I always kind of like to wrap up with a little bit of, things that you like about film, and then kind of advice for the audience. So just quickly, you talked about like the very first film that you watched. So was the first film you ever saw that arrested you, was it E.T. or was it another one? Like, what was it that grabbed you, and what was it about that film that sucked you in?
The first film in the cinema I saw, and it was my parents were out of town, and a friend of them took me to the theater, and it was sort of a rerun, and I was pretty young, and it was Apocalypse Now. And,
Apocalypse Now. Wow. That's a heavy one to start with. That's great.
and I was like, sort of like, he took me there, and my parents were upset later on because they didn't know what
Yeah.
he told me. That to it, this friend of theirs took me to, and he wanted to see it and said, "Oh, this child can see it." I mean, I'm glad it was Apocalypse Now and not something like The Shining or something.
Yeah, exactly. It didn't scar you too much, but it's
Yes.
great.
So I went to see Apocalypse Now, and the Vietnam War, we didn't have that, and I didn't have that subject matter in school yet. I
Right.
wasn't aware of it, and I'm just watching this, and it just starts off with the Doors, Jim Morrison song,
Yep.
and the jungle exploding, and I was just like sort of tranced, but also a little bit in shock.
Uh-huh.
And it just and I had a little bit of nightmares, and it took me a moment to get over it. But and
That's
then
great.
and it was just like, in this cinema, and I just literally didn't know what hit me. But it somehow intrigued me that I wanted to go back to the movie theater.
Huh.
And then, obviously the next one, as I mentioned to you, was like E.T. and other movies
Yeah,
that were a little bit more
that's more
family
palatable
friendly.
for the
And then my mother, from that point, when I told her about the movie, she was very upset with their friend, but then also made sure every movie I would see, she would like approve.
That's great. I love it. I
Yeah.
love that. That is amazing. That's a great one to start with. That will shape you for sure.
Yeah.
The only other question is, like, you know, filmmakers that you admire, like I said, having you on the show is somebody that I would qualify as a master storyteller. And when I've been around other ones like Mel Gibson, or I had Randall Wallace on the podcast talking about writing Braveheart. Like, these are people that I would happily just tag along with to see what they do. You're an accomplished filmmaker. You obviously, have your own brand. But who are the filmmakers you still look up to, that if you're like, hey, if I got a chance just to be a fly on the wall for a day to see how they do their thing, are there ones that you still kind of aspire to that inspire you?
I mean, I was always a big fan of Billy Wilder.
Oh, Billy Wilder was a legend.
Yeah, and what's interesting, or Howard Hawks as well. What I loved
Yep.
about either of those filmmakers are like they jump genre, and if you're looking at
Yeah.
something like Howard Hawks, like Bringing Up Baby,
Yep.
it's
Cary
such
Grant.
a, the delivery of the actors, the storytelling, or like Billy Wilder, like Sunset Boulevard or The
Yep.
Apartment, or movies like he did there. So I feel like or John Huston is another filmmaker I love.
Yep.
They're so well crafted. Every shot is they knew exactly where the camera will be, and exactly, sort of the frame and what it emotionally would do. And they were because at the time when you shot movies, rolling film was quite expensive,
Yeah.
and so they had to really think about it, that they every shot counted. And it often, at that time, the studio had the final cut, and the studio
Yep.
had cut. So a lot of those filmmakers shot the movie that you only could cut them one way.
Hmm.
You only could cut them the way they shot them. And I
Wow.
think, when you look at their framing, and you hear John Huston and some of these filmmakers speak, they said, no, we only shot this for that take for this amount of time, and did this angle because you only could cut it that way, the way we want the movie to be cut, because so the studio couldn't recut it. But and today, obviously, with the whole world of digital, often we just let the camera roll,
Yeah.
and often the director just speaks over it, and doesn't cut at all, and you have like all this coverage, and
Uh-huh.
there's like 20 ways to tell a story, and often the story is being made in editorial. And I'm a firm believer that often less is more, that one should really think of one's shots, think what the vision is for the film, and not just shoot a scene with multiple cameras and let it roll. I like to shoot with one camera, because my focus is then that the light is right. Because if I have to focus on like 3 or 4 cameras at once,
Yeah.
I can't light the scene perfectly,
Yeah.
because the light will be in the way. So I'm a filmmaker a little bit in that sense, old school, that I like to light the scene the way I like it, to have maximum 2 cameras. So we usually have only one, and shoot with one camera and make sure that that shot is exactly the way I want it.
Man, and those names that you mentioned, like with John Huston and Billy Wilder, have you ever watched the documentary series Five Came Back?
No, I haven't. No.
Oh, it's fantastic. I mean, there's things on Netflix, but it takes each of those filmmakers, including Frank Capra and John Ford, and John Ford, that did all the John Wayne movies, and it takes them through World War II when they were all doing documentary work in World War II. Frank Capra was doing the Why We Fight series, and all these guys were collaborating, and then all that they went through and survived in World War II, they came home, and they each did one of their greatest films when they came home. And so it's Five Came Back. It's about these 5 legendary filmmakers and their collaboration through World War II. It's a fantastic documentary, but those guys were all super special in their own right. For us, everything goes back to Frank Capra. Frank Capra, the idea of, optimism being kind of a rebellious quality that's in the DNA of this Sicilian immigrant that just kind of fights to kind of capture the human spirit and the American dream with movies like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and, Mr. Deeds and ultimately, It's a Wonderful Life. So, those guys, I think there was something, like you said, that was so disciplined of them not being able to have all the tricks to lean on and just be the discipline of simple classic storytelling and really knowing what they want to communicate with precision. It's an art form that I think the generation I've come up in, I don't even know how I'd function in that, but there's something so precise about it. So I totally agree with your
it's
picks.
Interesting. You say Capra, It's a Wonderful Life was an inspiration for a man called Otto for me as well.
I can see that.
Yeah.
I can totally see that. I mean, I see that in the DNA. And I think Tom Hanks is our generation's Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah.
So appropriately cast. Last question, and then we'll wrap things up. We have a lot of aspiring filmmakers and people that listen to the podcast. And I always, whenever I have somebody on that is a filmmaker I really respect, I just love to let them give a little bit of advice to the audience. So if you were to give advice to yourself as an emerging filmmaker looking backwards, or to somebody that's asking you for advice now, and they're trying to find their voice, they're just getting started as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, what would be the key component of advice that you would want to leave them in their journey?
I mean, the first one is truly, no matter what anybody says, to believe in themselves and in their heart and passion, and not to get derailed, and keep determined to tell that story. I think the other key is that to identify the story one wants to tell and make sure that story really resonates with their heart. And then the next thing is, I mean, today you have the technology. You can shoot basically your story on an iPhone or any phone, and you can edit it on your laptop.
Right.
So there's really, and I think at the end, the power of the story will speak for itself. And I would simplify it as much as possible, not to have too many locations, to keep it with a very limited cast, to keep it as simple as possible, but make sure that and I think what is also important to workshop it. It's especially you have a script, and maybe you have access to actors who are willing to do it and get the best actors possible. And sometimes there maybe can be even real people who are close to your character. One can rehearse this, but spend time and workshop it and work scenes, and then ultimately that the script gets developed and workshopped, and then pick up a camera, and it can be done for very limited resources. Shoot it, edit it, and go to festivals, and hope that one can sell the film in festivals. And the one film is a calling card, Whitley, for the next one. I think it's also very important to when one goes to festival to already have a next script in place, or a book one loves or has the rights to, or whatever it is. That because the sort of the attention span of people is very short, and that one has something ready to go. That because it's ultimately that one little film is just a calling card for the next one.
And I think that's great advice, and I think that never goes away. I think that's where there's the shared love. Like when you and I got in a room, it's like the shared love is just like, what story are we working on next? And hopefully the last movie earns us the right to do the story we're passionate about now. And so it was really validating because we when we sat down for coffee, we just started swapping stories about things that we were interested in. And when your excitement would light up and be like, you have to do this story, I'd be like, oh, okay, we'll chase that one. So, I think we all are just hoping that, we get to do the next one. And so that's a desire that is what keeps us going. Like the flash and the glamour of the job doesn't keep you going for long at all because it wears off very quickly. What keeps you going is a new story that you're in love with and that a problem you have to solve. So I love that in your body of work, man. We're huge fans here.
Yeah, thank you, Andy, and hope one day we collaborate on something.
That would be the dream, man. I would be thrilled at any point that we earn a Marc Forster film from the start. And in the meantime, Whitebird is one that to the audience, highly recommend. It's one that you have to see in the cinema. It is visual, it is beautiful, and it will leave you deeply emotionally moved and inspired. So that'll be out in theaters everywhere, October 4th. We're excited to be a part of that, and hopefully it's the first of many. Marc Forster, thank you for being on the Storytellers, my friend.
Thank you, Andy. One last anecdote about Whitebird. When we were shooting it in Czech Republic, and we were scouting locations, went from one location to the next. And every time we went to a location, it was just gray sky every day. And I said, if the light is there and the sun is there, we should shoot the scene at 11 o'clock right here.
Yeah.
And then the AD, the first AD who worked with us, says, but the light is never here. It's like, it's always will be gray here.
Yeah.
I said, no, but if there's light, then we should shoot at 11. So he scheduled the whole schedule. And when you watch the movie, you will see the sun coming out and peek out. And every scene we needed the sun to be there at that time. The light, the clouds parted, the sun came down. It was literally gave us 45 minutes of light. Clouds came back.
That's amazing.
And literally the crew looked at the DP and me and said, who did you guys make a deal with? I've never seen anything like it. I said, we didn't make a deal with anybody. I was just like praying that it will open up. Anyway.
It's amazing when a metaphor for the film can happen in real life like that. Because the idea of the film is, in gray circumstances, this beam of light that shines through to show hope and what's possible with kindness. And so I can't wait to rewatch the movie and see it through that. I figured that was just planned, but I see now that it was a little bit providential. So highly recommend it, man, and can't wait to see what comes of it. We're huge fans. Appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, Andy. Very much appreciate it too. Had a great time chatting with you.
All right, man. So that's the show. I want to thank Marc for being a part of this show today. And just for me, I just got so many, they say that, good artists create, but great artists steal. Well, there were so many nuggets in that interview that I'm just going to steal. I'm going to be, I'm going to run with that. Tons of wisdom, have so much respect for him as a filmmaker and an artist. And I just think that Marc as a filmmaker leads with his heart. He doesn't do things that he doesn't fully absorb on a DNA level and try to emote. And the part about that I was inspired about the story was the thing that protects him from ego is this idea of not wanting to take on anything that doesn't scare him and there's not a potential for failure. He likes that element of risk and of trying different things because that keeps him connected to the story he's telling instead of the hype around it. And I think as a storyteller, there's something really powerful about that. The idea that I want a story that so rests me that it pushes me past my fear into taking a risk that I've never done before, and that being something worth telling. And I think there's something that I think is powerful to take with that on your own journey of looking for those stories that are outside of your comfort zone, but so rest you emotionally that you have to tell the story. And that's what keeps me coming back to this job, the idea that there's so many easier ways to go out and earn a paycheck. But when I find a story that I'm obsessed with, I have to tell it. Those are the ones worth telling. If you can't answer that question of, is this worth pushing me past my fear? Then don't tell it. Don't tell that story. Invest in the ones that are worth the investment in time. And so that word is one that I think is really applicable from Marc's journey. Whitebird out in theaters October 4th. You're going to love it. So look for that film coming to you soon in the cinema. Until the next time, thanks for being a part of the show. We'll see you on the next edition of The Storytellers.
The Storytellers is a Kingdom Story Company production. It is produced by Nick Carey, with production assistance from Ben and Justin Bailey, and creative assistance from Jaron Weatherly and Beach Approach. Our executive producers are Kevin Downs and Brandon Gregory. Social media for the show is run by the Troops and Allies team, and our music is Twisted Rooster by Tommy Profit. Special thanks to our entire team at Kingdom Story Company. To make sure that you never miss out on any of our exciting guests, subscribe to The Storytellers for free on YouTube at Kingdom Story Company or wherever you listen to podcasts. For exclusive first looks at our upcoming films, behind-the-scenes content, and invitations to advanced screenings, join the conversation as a Kingdom Insider at kingdomstorycompany.com and follow us at Kingdom Story Company across all platforms. As always, thanks for joining Andrew Erwin and his friends on The Storytellers.